Recording now, this is lesson 3.7, Order of Operations with Decimal Numbers. Before watching the video, I would suggest that you go back and watch the Brain Pop video on order of operations, as it does give a very good overview as to why we have order of operations in math, and also deals with bigger equations that you'll see later on in your math years. So if you have a chance to watch the Brain Pop video on order of operations, go ahead and do that first before watching this video. Now, before you watch this video, make sure that you have the 3.7 Order of Operations worksheet in front of you, along with a highlighter, pencil, and eraser. So if you need to pause the recording to grab those items, please do that now. I'm going to continue. Now, there's a helpful acronym that you need to always remember here when you're applying the order of operations when you're solving questions. So in the Brain Pop video, it introduces it as PEMDAS because of the way that they tell you what the acronym can stand for. Now, typically you'll also hear BEMDAS or BEDMAS as well. It's all essentially the same thing. Now, the P or the B stands for either parentheses. So I'm going to jot this down here in pencil. So parentheses. And by the way, anything I'm jotting down in black, you should jot in pencil on your page, or brackets. The E stands for something called exponents, which you may encounter this year, but most likely in future math years. The M stands for multiplication. Now, actually, I'm going to do this in a different color. I'm going to put multiplication in red, and I'm actually going to put it in the same color as D, division. And in the same color, and this will make sense to you later on, I'm going to write down same level, left to right. Okay, and then in another color, I'll use green. The A stands for addition. And then the S stands for subtraction. And then again, same level, left to right. So the way you look at the order of operations is the following. So whenever you see parentheses or brackets, you always solve that element of the equation first, whenever you see it. So if you don't see parentheses and brackets and you see exponents, then you need to solve that first, or you solve that after you solve the parentheses and brackets. Now, then when you have multiplication and division, if those appear next in the equation, now if they appear, so basically they're considered to be the same level of operation, so you solve those left to right. So if they're the only ones left in an equation, for example, then you solve the multiplication and division as is, left to right. Same with the addition and subtraction. If they're the only ones left, typically it's the last one left in the equation, then you would solve those left to right. Again, this will make more sense as we do more sample equations later on. Now, memorize this because you'll encounter this basically for the rest of your math life. And off to the side, I'm actually going to use a ruler and divide this further, because one helpful way to remember this is, and I'll use a different color, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So it helps you remember the order of the operation. So then I'm going to take my highlighter and highlight that as well. Okay, so please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, so that's where PEMDAS comes into play. Again, you'll often hear BEMDAS or BEDMAS as well. You can come up with your own acronym to remember the order. So that's order of operations. Now let's start to apply this in a question. I'm going to go back to my pen here in black. So let's scroll down the page here. So it says in the instructions, for each of the following questions, solve using the order of operations. Highlight the expression you will solve first and then solve the question using the funnel method. Circle your final answer and follow the example below. So here's the example here for you. As you can see in the original equation, you have 5.3 or 5 and 3/10 plus 2 and 7/10 in brackets times 3. Now, notice you have the brackets appearing first anyway, so you're going to solve 5 and 3/10 plus 2 and 7/10. The answer to that is 8. It's written actually right below as the answer to 5 and 3/10 plus 2 and 7/10. You still have to recopy the times 3 because you haven't solved that yet. Because multiplication is the next and the only one left to solve in the equation, 8 times 3, the answer is 24. That's nicely laid out to you left to right. But if we look at question number 1 here, number 1, you have 10 times 5 and 4/10 plus 11 and 2/10 in brackets. Now, I know I said to use a highlighter to highlight the expression you will solve first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to constantly underline, and that's the method that you could use as well. So because we're always going to apply PEMDAS or BEDMAS, and I would suggest at the top of your page on a quiz or a test, you always write this acronym down to help you remember the order. Please make sure that you do that so that you remember which order to apply the operations. Now, 5 and 4/10 plus 11 and 2/10, you know that that has to be solved first. Even though it appears second in the equation, you have to solve it first. I'm going to write down an equal sign down here. I'm going to recopy 10 times because I haven't solved that part of the equation yet. I'm going to solve 5 and 4/10 plus 11 and 2/10, and I'm going to do my work off to the side here. 11 and 2/10, 4 plus 2 is 6, 5 plus 1 is 6, and 1. So I've got 10 times 16 and 6/10. Okay, so I'm left now with just one last part of the equation to solve. Because I have multiplication next, and it's the last part of the equation, now I'm just going to underline that, so I know I'm going to solve that one next. You've got 10 times 16 and 6/10, and I know I can do that in my head. I know that's final answer is 166. What I mean by the funnel method is that it funnels so that your final answer ends up here in one line and that you're lining up all of your work below. Notice that I wrote the answer for 5 and 4/10 plus 11 and 2/10 right underneath as 16 and 6/10. So I'm just going to erase that because it looks like a, okay. And then you can see that I rewrote the answer to 10 times 16 and 6/10 as 166 right below it. Okay, so that's applying the order of operations there. Now, I would suggest pause the recording now and try number 2 on your own before you see the answer or you work through the answer with me. Okay, or what you could do is you could just pause it after each step just to double check that you're on the right track. So again, if you want to try number 2 on your own and apply the order of operations, do it first and then check your answer when you're finished solving the equation. Now I'm going to continue here. So I notice in number 2, I've got 12 plus 4 times 3 divided by 5. Okay, so I've got addition, I've got multiplication, and I've got division. There are no brackets, there are no exponents. So I'm going to apply PEMDAS still by looking at the multiplication first. Because remember, I said up here that if multiplication and division are left in a sentence, or they're like the first or the last thing that you have to solve, and you have them both, they are considered to be the same level of operation and you solve it left to right. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to solve, What I'm going to do first is I'm going to solve the multiplication. So I'm going to underline the 4 times 3. Underneath, I'm going to recopy the 12 plus because you haven't solved that yet. I'm going to write the answer to 4 times 3 right below. 4 times 3 is 12. I'm going to recopy 12 divided by 5. Now, again, you might think that you would want to solve the 12 plus 12 first because that appears first. However, you're still applying the order of operations. So what you need to do next, according to the order of operations, is the division. Okay, so the next part of the equation, again, you're going to do 12 divided by 5. So I'm going to recopy on the next line 12 plus, I'm going to write down the answer to 12 divided by 5 here. Now, because I'm a little bit short on time in this recording, I know that 12 divided by 5 ends up being approximately 2.4, or I think that is the exact answer, 2.4. Now, so what you have here is 12 plus 2.4. Obviously, that's the last part of the equation that you're going to solve. You've got 12 plus 2.4, and your final answer becomes 14 and 4/10. I'm just going to double check that. 12 plus 2.4. Any work you can do off to the side, and that's 14 and 4/10. And you circle your final answer there. Okay? Now, the next step is doing question 3. Again, if you want to pause the recording and work out question 3 on your own before I get to going through the answer with you, please feel free to do so. I'm going to continue to the next part here. So, number 3, I'm going to rewrite PEMDAS here as a reference, or PEMDAS. Now, I see here we have brackets already. Now, interestingly, within the brackets, we have addition and subtraction. When you have brackets and you have multiple operations within a bracket, you still have to apply the order of operations still. It still applies. Now, technically, you have addition and subtraction, and we treat it as left to right because they're the same level. So if I'm recopying this, I know for sure I'm actually going to solve 7 and 1/10 plus 2 and 8/10 first. So I'm going to recopy 3.1 times, and then I'm going to work out the answer to 7 and 1/10 plus 2 and 8/10. Notice, girls, how I'm really lining up my work, and I'm making sure that the answer is right below what I solved in the previous line. So 7 and 1/10 plus 2 and 8/10 becomes 9 and 9/10 minus 4.3. 4 and 3/10, plus 5 and 2/10. Now, I still notice too that I left it in brackets because I haven't fully solved the bracket first. So it nicely lines up the next line. Again, recopy everything. You have to do this step by step. You're going to recopy 3 and 1/10 times 9 and 9/10 minus 4 and 3/10. I'm going to take that out of brackets now because that'll be my next step because it's the subtraction. So I'm going to work that out. That becomes 5 and 6/10 plus 5 and 2/10. Now if I look at what I have next, looks like I'm still solving this left to right because now we have multiplication and addition left. We have to do the multiplication first. So we're going to do 3 and 1/10 times 5 and 6/10. So I know that if I look at 3 and 1/10 times 5 and 6/10, I'm going to treat that as the whole numbers first. I'm going to forget the decimal, so 31 times 56, and go ahead and do the multiplication yourself too. And again, at any point, if you want to pause it just to check your answer, please feel free to do so. Or do the question on your own, 18, 0, 5, 15, 6, 13, 7, and 1. Okay, so my answer to 31 times 56 is 1,736. I look at the original estimate numbers that I multiplied, the decimals. I'm going to round this to about 3. I'm going to estimate that to about 6, so 3 times 6 is 18. If my estimate's about 18, I know the decimal point has to go between the 7 and 3 because it has to be close to 17 there. So the answer to 3 and 1/10 times 5 and 6/10 would be 17 and 36/100 plus 5 and 2/10. And then we can do the work here for the last bit, 17 and 36/100 times, plus 5 and 2/10, and make sure you're lining up the decimals properly. So we know we have 6, 5, 12, and 2. So then your final answer becomes 22 and 56/100 for that. 56/100. Okay, now